Everyone. My name is Piers Matthews. I'm the CTO at Dataweavers, and I'm here today to talk to you about how you can drive innovation by using an approach called platform operations. And I've got a bit of a platform operations guide for you just to take you through what that means and hopefully how it can help you on your journey. So really what platform operations is about is its intent is to lay the foundation for a successful modern composable journey with your DXP ecosystem. When we think about composable journeys with OptiCMS or OptiSAT CMS, what it's supposed to do for us is provide agility, scale, and velocity. But to be successful on that journey, you need to think about platform operations in terms of the way you adopt the products and implement. So what is the business case for platform operations? Pretty simple, really. It's all about saying, how do we put a platform in place across our entire ecosystem that essentially says all our developers and our creators can focus on building experiences on not on the non-function. So if you look at the left of this diagram, typically what we see is in organizations, developers and non-functional people end up spending a lot of time worrying about DevOps, the way about integration, availability, things like what rendering host should I choose and how do I integrate that into my system? I've got a custom database. How do I link it up to my platform? I pull data in. What about APIs that do my integration? How do I link it all up? And then obviously worrying about quite fundamentally in the enterprise space, security around that entire stack. So what we find is the balance is often wrong. And what we really want is those folks to focus on just building code and just building experience. So what that really means is we need to build that foundation that they can effectively put that on top of. The way I like to think about this is managing a modern composable, or even in the traditional space solution, is best served when thinking about your end-to-end ecosystem as a platform that you treat as a product. So you're delivering a product out to your developers and your people to innovate on top of, so they can actually just go and create those experiences. And the way to do that is to think about having a central multidisciplinary team from a technology standpoint that can provide that working platform back out to those folks. You have to build those experiences. So how do you go about doing this? Well, really, there's two phases. The first phase is what we call platform engineering. And the key aspects that platform engineering embodies that we need to think about when you're putting these platforms in place. And the first one, and one of the ones that often gets thought about too late in the process, is we need to think about DevOps. And DevOps has to be baked in from the ground up, from the very beginning of the creation of the ecosystem. This is including everything to release and deploy applications and code as part of the DXP, from the code quality tools to thinking about how we deploy in a way that means we have zero downtime as part of an ecosystem. The components that you choose to couple together and glue together as part of your entire ecosystem needs to be pre-configured and connected to infrastructure as code. So you're not sitting there manually trying to put in settings to get things to work together. They should just work out of the box when you connect them up. We need to think about security as a multi-layered, fully managed environment. Right, so that needs to be built in from the beginning as part of that platform. Think about security and how you build it in. And then performance management. Also, often what we see is folks think about performance management once they've built the platform in place. The way you measure and monitor performance of your technology stack needs to be built in your platform from the beginning across all the different layers. And then lastly, the abstraction of all the underlying configuration and any architecture integrity. When your developers and your creators will come to build on top of the ecosystem that you put together, they mustn't have to worry about how things fit together. They must just be able to build. That must be pre-baked into the platform you put together. Again, the goal over here is a developer-friendly environment where developers and creators can just create that experience. So the first stage is standing up the platform, building that foundation for folks to build on top of. The second phase is ongoing. So once that platform is up and running, it's not something that you can just leave and not monitor, not manage, and not extend, and not evolve. Right, because now what's happening is people are starting to build those experiences on top of that platform. You need to keep that platform running. So there's a couple of key things you have to build in the operations stack. Think about site reliability. This is how do I make sure my website or my components are up and running 24/7. And remember, it's not just the website, it's all components that your website talks to. You have to think about how do I manage that from a reliability perspective. Do you have the people in place that can keep that happening for me? Or do you have automation in place that can do failovers and cutovers and things when necessary? Start security. One of the biggest issues is making sure that it's not just about building security up front, it's about saying, how do I keep that security monitored and actioned? So when something happens, it's actually someone who can respond to the security incident and block that hole or block that IP address that needs to be blocked. Site performance management. Again, site performance management is critically important. It's very easy to see how a site on day one looks very fast, and a couple of days later, that performance dips down. So making sure the actual performance of the sites and how that content is experienced by actual end users, not just the site itself, but actually monitoring from the different locations and make sure that is performing correctly, that you've got that built in place from an operations perspective and the process to tune that ongoing. Configuration changes and updates should be seamless. So often what happens is platforms evolve over time, and we need to change configuration. We need to create another site or a new sub-site or a new path or a new route. How do we do it in such a way that's seamless from an ecosystem perspective and we can just roll that change out? And that, again, is part of having the operations team or capability to drive that. And lastly, your production scaling is automatically managed. So across the entire ecosystem, whether you're SaaS or whether you're self-hosted or some combination there in between, how do we make sure we can scale according to what's actually happening in the real world? And obviously, we've tested for that. So really the two pieces are the platform engineering and the platform operations, and those two complement each other. So that's quite simple, but what are the key things that it sounds simple, right? Platform engineering, platform operations. But there's some definite traps that we see customers fall into when they try to stand up their platform as an ecosystem. And these traps are probably one of the biggest ones for release coordination. Start to think about the applications in silos, and they don't think about releasing the components of the application in a way that they can release together. So what typically happens is the change happens in one component, and 20 minutes later we realize, oh, we're supposed to make a change to another component that's dependent on that. So release coordination is really important in terms of making sure that all the components that form part of the ecosystem can deploy synchronously. So when you've tested it and it's all good, how do you move to the next environment, the next area, so that all release at the same time with all those components work together? And the secret to that success is really just about, again, from platform engineering, making sure you've got what I call good DevOps. The DevOps thinks about more than just one component, thinks about the dependencies across all of those components. This is a 15-minute talk. I can't go through all the considerations. I will share the slides with anyone who wants them. But there's a bunch of considerations you need to think about when doing good DevOps. So dependencies, how the APIs link together. Think about clearing caches at the right time. These things all form part of making sure that your release coordination works correctly. The next trap, and this is probably one of the biggest ones, and this typically happens when customers move from, let's call it traditional, into the headless world. All of a sudden, there's a business logic that needs to live somewhere. So this is what I call the I forgot about the API layer in my organization problem. So what typically happens over here is that core integration of business logic needs to live somewhere. And it's not always appropriate to just go and jam all that logic into your front-end application because it's untestable, not reusable in that fashion. So one of the things we have to think about is, where am I going to put my API layer? Have I got an API hosting platform I can drop those business APIs onto that form part of my ecosystem? The secret to success over here is obviously think about building and hosting a dedicated API layer. There's many tools components you can choose in this part for you, but there's an important consideration when you look at your DXP overall. Sort of the next trap over here is what we call multiple attack surfaces. And this happens when we start to build a composable ecosystem together, where there's multiple components in our DXP stack. So it's not just the CMS, it's not just the experimentation, there's some backend APIs, there's a custom database somewhere, and this forms part of what I'm building, right? This is my product, my platform that people are building the experiences on top of. As soon as you break things apart and you get away from this monolithic architecture, you end up with multiple endpoints that can be attacked, which means that you need to think about how do I secure those multiple endpoints. So very often what we see when people go down this approach, they think, well, I'm protected because I'll just put a firewall in front of my website and that's all good. Forgetting that there's all these APIs and integration points that your website talks to. How do you make sure the security is carried across all that entire stack? So a multi-layered security approach is really important. Thinking about every layer of the architecture that has the security built in from a platform perspective. So whether it's the front-end protection, the API layer, even into your back-end line of business systems, how do you make sure they're protected from what's happening out on the web? And SIEM integration, this is the key one, right? So in enterprise organizations, we have SIEM platforms, this is our events, security gets all of those. How do I make sure my web architecture ties into that security ecosystem So my IT team or my security team is aware of what's actually happening on there. How do I build product and build capabilities to make sure that linking actually happens? Again, this is things we want at the platform level, but our developers, we don't want our developers to have to worry about this. The platforms just provide that integration and all that capability out of the box. Trap number 4, monitoring gaps. This is a personal favorite. So very often when we have a composable architecture, we have a front-end experience, we have the CMS headless backend, or even not headless backend, we have some APIs, maybe a database, maybe some other components that form part of our ecosystem. And very often what we do is we decide to put monitoring in, and what we do is just go put monitoring on the front end, and that's it. But actually what you need to think about doing is putting monitoring across the entire stack and centralizing that reporting, so when your stack stops performing or there's issues in your stack, you can identify where those bottlenecks are. And again, it's about something when you start putting your platform in place, how do I make sure that I have good monitoring, or at least the ability to pull in monitoring from the source into a central location, so I can observe when I have a problem on my stack, so I can address that problem. So the secret to success over here is thinking about monitoring from an end-to-end perspective, not just the front end. All the components in the architecture, how do I monitor, how do I make sure that they're good? So key considerations over there are obvious. Probably one of the most important ones is monitoring isn't just about monitoring, but it's also about building the alerting on top of that monitoring. Because no one's going to sit in front of a dashboard the whole day and watch traffic flow from the site and hope that I can pick up when something's gone wrong. So what you need to do is when you set your monitoring up, work out what those breach conditions are and set up alerts. And those alerts will then tell you when something's wrong in your platform. And if your monitoring is good, it should also tell you exactly where the challenge is, so your team can address that from an operation perspective. Step number 5, and this one is specifically for the headless world, right? So as we start to go down headless, this is one of the challenges that we often see, is people dive headlong into headless without thinking about what is my content generation strategy. So what I mean, in modern headless architecture, you've got your headless backend or CMS backend, and you've got your front end. And what happens typically, what we see, is someone goes and publishes new content on the back end, or content manager goes and creates content, and they go look at the website, and guess what? Their page isn't refreshed. And they sit and they wait. And maybe 3 hours later, all of a sudden that page is refreshed. And what typically happens there is when the devs put it together, and I thought about this from a platform perspective, they didn't think, what is the refresh strategy that I actually need? What is the technique for content generation? So they typically go for a thing called incremental static regeneration, which is like it's on some kind of a timer, or they just do static content, which means I need to rebuild the whole site to get it loaded. But there's different approaches that one can take. So it's about figuring out what is right. The one we find works really good is on-demand generation. So as that button is clicked to publish on the big screen, the front end refreshes and you get the new content. The secret to success over here is really plan with your marketing team how they're actually going to work with that content in their site. How do they need it refreshed? Are there parts of the site or parts in the site that are really important that if I publish it needs to be published, or does it need to go later? What is the strategy that we're working with? So quite important as you think about that. And one of the last things are, when you think about content and publishing, remember not all content necessarily comes from your CMS system. Sometimes content comes from some other platform in your environment. So back-end integration. And what I see people miss over here is this concept of API throttling. So if you have a solution where you can be putting into some public CRM system or something like that, you need to be aware of throttling on the API layer, because what can happen is you actually reach those throttling limits. So thinking about all of that when you're putting your content generation from a publishing perspective together is important. And this is definitely something we see very much on the headless space, and something when you start to go into an ecosystem, you need to start asking questions. Have we covered these gaps? Have we thought about how we set up and play our application structure plan? So that's trap 5. And trap 6 is this one, the DIY rendering host. So there's 2 options over here. You can go for a SaaS-based rendering host, or you can have a rendering host that lives inside of your environment. There is a good use case for having one in your environment, and very often that's because you're a big enterprise or compliance-heavy or security-heavy industry, and you need to think about how do we actually host the other front end? How do we keep the front end on our side of the fence so we can integrate securely behind the firewall, etc. If you do that, what we often see is people try to custom build this stuff from the ground. Just because it's in your environment doesn't mean you need to custom build it. The recommendation of you is if you have to go in-tenant, self-hosted front end, think about getting a proven platform that runs inside of the environment. Don't custom build the front end hosting in a headless architecture yourself. Get something that's proven. There's 2 considerations over here. This thing has to integrate into your SIEM. You have to think about network level integration into your backend APIs and so forth. So if you're going to do DIY in host, please pick a proven platform. I guess would be the recommendation as you stand up that platform. So in summary, another bit of a whirlwind through the topic. The platform operations really is this ability to say that your foundation is important. We want to create a full end-to-end ecosystem, all the DevOps, all the security, all the monitoring, all the forms across my task stack. So my developers and my creatives don't have to worry about that. They just want to come and build the experience, not worry about any of those things that typically hold them up as they start to adopt this new big fancy transformation project. So the key traps that we mentioned, just a summary, DevOps and release coordination, important to build it in from day one. Think about where your APIs are going to live. You're going to host them yourself. You're going to use a third-party APIs are only important things for the puzzle. Centralized multi-security layer, custom task stack. Content generation becomes important if your transformation is a headless one. And obviously, again, headless. If you're going to host rendering hosting tenant, pick a proven platform as kind of the couple of traps that we see typically people play at. So that's the summary. So my only call to action, maybe the only plug I'll make here. If platform operations does mean teaching your time, CMS, ops ecosystem as a product, does it mean you can just buy it, not just yet? That's what we do. So we have two products, Fusion for Optimizely and Arc for Optimizely. These both provide everything I've spoken about as kind of underlying platform capability. So if you want a bit of a ramp up from the start to some of what I've spoken to you about, we can help you with that. Our stand is right at the back of the hall.